had me at cello, cello. You had me at cello. You had me at cello. Oh, you had me at cello.
Hi everybody, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday. Hopefully all week you've been availing yourself of the many materials at youhadmeatcello.com or at cellocartman.com. And not a coincidence, my guest this week is none other than Dr. Stefan Kartman from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. How are you doing, Stefan?
I'm fine, Benjamin. I'm so glad to be with you this afternoon.
Oh, it's a delight to have you. So traditionally, we start out, just in case there are some people who aren't as familiar with you, can you tell about your musical background, how you got to where you are today?
Okay, well, a lot of practice. You know, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. That's the old joke. You know, I had a very early start on the cello because I had music in my family. My father is a violinist. He's still living at the ripe age of 89, and he still remembers back in the day when he went to Juilliard where he bought every record in his 5,000 records collection that I have now in my house. And I used to play chamber music with him early on. What I was told about my start on the cello was that my older sister, started with the violin, and she had lessons with my father, and I guess those must have been somewhat difficult because my mom's description of that was that they would go down and spend an hour or two together in the studio, and then one or the other of them would come out crying, and the other one would come out with their hair standing on end.
Oh no!
So that being the family experience with the children studying with the patriarchal figure, they decided that cello might be a better option, and indeed I participated in that because when my dad had a string quartet with this would have been with David Cowley, who is also a cellist from Wisconsin. David Cowley and Roland and Almeida Vamos. This was the Antioch String Quartet back in the day, and I can actually send you a picture of that ensemble from back then.
Great.
Apparently, the cello, when I was still crawling as a toddler, when I was still crawling, the cello was the instrument that I could reach, and apparently, I would put my head or my hand on the cello, and the vibrations from it would just really make my face go blank as I was kind of trying to process all of that information. So I'm told that that's how I started, but of course I don't remember that specifically. And then then came all of the practicing, and I had of course marvelous teachers all the way. And in my formal training at the collegiate level, I studied with Harvey Shapiro and Zara Nelsova, who were two teachers at the Juilliard School. I studied also with Alan Harris, who was a product of the Starker studio at Indiana. I had lessons with Anthony Cook, who was a pupil of Fournier. Not Fournier. Anthony Cook was a pupil of Tortelier. Excuse me. And then on the East Coast, Harvey Shapiro and Zara Nelsova, and eventually Bernard Greenhouse when I did my doctorate. And that was kind of the East Coast connection. There was Harvey Shapiro, Zara Nelsova, and Bernard Greenhouse, and they all kind of represented different areas or different pedagogical lineages, I want to say. Harvey studied with a cellist by the name of Willeke. Willeke came to the United States at Brahms's urging. Willeke played all of Brahms' chamber music with Brahms, and then when he came over to the States, the 19th and early 20th century composers and musicians that were famous that came over here, like Richard Strauss or Camille Saens, he performed with them. So he performed Strauss's sonata with Strauss, and Saens conducted as he played in the orchestra. So when I studied with Mr. Shapiro, I felt like I had just a one generation's away from a contact from those marvelous composers of the works that they teach at Juilliard, which are all those 19th century chestnuts, you know.
Yeah.
Similarly, when I studied with Zara years later, but by the time I studied with Zara, I think I was I was certainly more accomplished. And she really wanted me to be her assistant. I think to take the cellists how should I say this? Zara is gone. Zara is gone now. What she wanted to teach the cellists that really wanted to play badly enough to make sacrifices, like not have a life and practice. And, I was obviously that, but some of her students, the undergraduates in particular, she would just assume have somebody else teach them until they got to that point. So my experience with her was more as an assistant, although I did have lessons with her every week, and she was, wow, what a personality. I mean, she really was the grande dame of cello. I'll never forget the first experience I had with her. At that point, I was living with my fiance, who was a pianist. I had a kind of a rundown rust bucket of a car that I was in, and because I was Zara's teaching assistant, I would pick her up and take her from the hotel to the music school. This is Rutgers University, where I was doing my doctorate, and she had elaborate scarves that would flow behind her, and she still had the bouffant hairdo, and still somehow in her 80s had blonde hair. I am not sure how exactly that occurred. Maybe that was just a freak of nature, but possibly there was some chemistry involved. In any case, I picked her up the first time at the music school to take her back to the hotel. And she, of course, sat in the passenger seat, and my wife-to-be sat in the back seat. Anyway, Zara was having some trouble with her hip that week. And she leaned over to me, and she looked at me with the biggest, bluest eyes I think I had ever seen. And she said, "Oh, Stefan, the seatbelt, I can't manage." And she batted her eyes at me, and it was really, really something, And when we got to the Hyatt, and I was carrying her millions of dollars Stradivari in a soft cello case.
Oh!
Don't ask me why. That's just what she did, Anyway, as I was about to go through the roundabout door, which is, the terror of all cellists, of course, and especially with a soft case and a Stradivari, I was a little self-conscious. And she obviously had been to this place many times before. And so she walked over to the side of the roundabout door, and she said, "Oh, Stefan, why should we struggle?" And she pressed this button, and these two doors separated and made this sound, psh, and open. And she wafted into the lobby of the Sarasota Hyatt with her scarf trailing somewhat behind. Anyway, that was some of my memories of Zara Nelsova, and I learned a lot from her. Actually, it was different things than what I studied with Harvey. As I mentioned, I was more of an assistant at that point as a doctorate student there, and I used to come to my lessons. See, I was used to having lessons with Mr. Shapiro, where I would actually touch the bow to the string, and Harvey would say no, and then he'd start telling me how stupid I was before I even played a note. He was tough, but he was fun also. He had a brilliant sense of humor, a great wit, and he was a wonderful cellist also. But anyway, my experience was working on the first measure of a piece, endlessly. And then, I was just expected to take that, whatever I learned in that measure, to the rest of the piece. Well, Zara, my very first lesson with her, I came in with a piece that I knew from having played it with orchestra at times in the past. I brought in the Garcello Concerto, and I, played through the first movement expecting her to stop me at any moment, which she didn't. And then I got to the end, and I'm kind of waiting for her to tear me apart. And she says, "Oh, that's lovely what you do with the second theme group. It's nice that you make the contrast with the first. I think a little slower on the scale, the second scale up in the recapitulation." And I was getting ready to try to do these things that she was asking, and she said, "Do you have the second movement?" And so I said, okay. So I, played the second movement for her, and "Oh, you have a marvelous spiccato," she said. And then she said, "I like the coda to go a little bit faster, And so I was getting ready to do that. And do you have the third movement? So, I got through the whole piece in that one lesson.
Wow.
And then I thought, okay, this has got to be some kind of strange thing, because I was just not used to this at all. I thought she was just doing a survey, to see what she needed to work on, and with me in the future. And she said, "And what will you be playing for me next week?" So during my lessons that year, I went through, I think, Elgar, Lalo Saint-Saëns, Rococo Variations, Schumann, Dvorak. I think I did all but one of Bach's suites, and the one was the E flat. And then all of Beethoven's sonatas, both Brahms sonatas, Rachmaninoff, Chopin Sonata, and Richard Strauss Sonata. I can't remember everything because it was a different whole piece every week. Wow. And it was such a shock to my system, I can tell you. Because this was at the time that I had to be in the library hours a day to study for my comprehensives and all of that. So that was a completely different experience. I studied with Bernie, who was really a marvelous musician and a marvelous chamber musician. And I would say that Bernie was, well, first of all, he was a dear fellow. I mean, he was very good to me. And he had a beautiful Strad also that he used to encourage me to play sometimes in lessons. I had a fine instrument, but he wanted me to sometimes play on his Strad. And he was always encouraging me to find more color in my playing, and I would say that was one of the harbingers. Again, in Bernie's case, I had really done the nuts and the bolts of becoming a competent cellist with other teachers, and so I think that both Bernie and Zara thought that they could just let that aspect of the technical aspect of my preparation be handled. Once in a while I would get a suggestion here and there, but it was really very, very seldom that they would offer technical suggestions. I was more musical from them.
It is funny, isn't it, how, like what you mentioned with Zara, that she preferred working with them at a particular level. There are some people whose teaching styles, they prefer working at a particular level rather than being able to kind of feel like they can do all ages and all levels. And likewise, the ones that really clearly love to work on big picture musical things versus the ones who love to get into the nitty gritty of how to execute this or that better. Many of them seem to have their preferences.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's important to study with more than one teacher during your lifetime.
Right. And let's see. And then what about Anthony Cook?
Yeah, Tony Cook was really, I would say he got me started on all of the things that I needed to play well technically on the instrument. It's not that I didn't get technical advice. I had plenty of that from Mr. Shapiro, but I mean, I think that Mr. Shapiro hit the high points of really advanced technique, and Tony, who is still alive, he was my high school teacher, and he made me do, I don't want to say against my will, but I fought it all the way, scales, and he made me do etudes and things like that. Oh boy, that just used to burn me. Growing up in a musical family and hearing music all the time, what I would do with my early teachers, one of whom was David Cowley, who was the cellist in my dad's quartet, was I didn't read music, but I had a really keen ear and I had a very good memory for melody. And so if I could get somebody, my teacher, in other words, to play something for me once, just once was all I needed, then I could look at the music page and I didn't need really to see anything. I just had to pretend that I was reading the notes. And so I became really an expert in conning David Cowley into, I would play a couple of notes and then I would make a scratch or, miss a shift or something like that. And then he would say, no, you can't do that. And then he would start playing it because it was really easy to con him. I don't know whether David is still alive, but if he sees this, he would probably be horrified. He probably knew, in all fairness, he probably knew that's what I was doing. I mean, you'd have to be a little bit too focused on something else to not realize that your student actually didn't know how to read notes. So, of course, the result that's had in my teaching is I'm always sniffing for that when I have a talented kid that's got a good ear and they come in, and they don't know how to find whether they have a whole step between two fingers or a half step because they're not aware of what pitch they're on. Mm-hmm. That's always kind of a fun moment for me because I remember what a horrible guy I was in my lessons.
That is funny. Well, now, so this, I think, makes a good segue. I was going to save it for later, but would you tell about your book, The Artist's Guide to the Cello Technique?
Artist's Guide to Cello Technique. Yes, I would be happy to tell you about my book, An Artist's Guide to Cello. And all of my students, of course, have it. And actually, I have it in PDF form, so it's available on my website. And now I'm actually having it's being translated into Cantonese and into Mandarin, so that it can be, because I do a lot of teaching actually overseas. I have some students that are teachers in the China Conservatory and in Taiwan in the university there, and also friends that have students that are they're performers themselves, but they have a private studio, and their students, they speak traditional Cantonese or they speak Mandarin, and up until now, they would take the exercises from my book, but the prose that's in there that describes how to do various things is not really available to them. And so, just as a for instance, let me see here. I'm gonna go. Let me see if I can go high tech on you for a second. Okay. So here is some pages from my book, and I'm going to zoom in on this because I know that it's going to be too small. But for instance, this Hexachords exercise, I'll play a little bit of it for you. So. And so on. This particular exercise is about 3-note combinations and getting from one spacing to another. And, it starts in various places on the instrument. And I found that in any of those places, whether it's in a scale passage or in a melody, that I'm having difficulty finding balance in my hand, depending on the spacing of the finger as I go to the new position or not. That it's a very helpful exercise. So now coming back to what I was saying about the prose for my students in China, if I was to introduce just this, which is what they have gotten up until now, it doesn't really describe, how to use your fingers and your arm, whereas there is some prose that describes the exercise itself, so that you can understand what's the theory behind the combinations of the fingers, and also some limited, I would say, description of how the exercises are used. So in this book, this is one of many exercises, including all of our favorites, the Galamian scale system and such. And so accompanying the book over the years, I have been putting together some videos that are available. Oh, the book, so that you can see it a little bit better. This is what it looks like. I kind of held it up before to the camera, but that's the scroll of my cello. You'll recognize it. Right here it is. In any case, the book itself has the scales, the Galamian scales, with some interesting fingerings, because I know that quite often people will do all of the scales with a pattern fingering, that they can use kind of the same fingering on every scale. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In mine, you can see already that I'm not using kind of the standard repetitive pattern fingering so that all of the scales feel the same. And I guess my specific thinking behind that is that I'm actually using the scales to exercise different spacings and shifting combinations. Whereas the hexachord exercise obviously goes over the same shifts and then moves the whole thing up a half step and does it there. That's an exercise that's specifically designed to go at a set of shifts and an order of notes, right? I would say that most frequently when I have a scale passage in, for instance, Rococo Variations or something like that, I'll wind up coming up with a fingering that suits the rhythm and the shape of the passage.
Right.
So, for instance, if you get to... this kind of thing, or... Yeah, okay, so I'm playing wrong key, but anyway, you understand, shifting because of the scale passage's rhythm. I probably wouldn't use that, if I was using a pattern fingering for all of my scales. Or I would use this, and I would have to be kind of relearning the scale in a way. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I intentionally chose some interesting fingerings in that scale, including, going back to, I was speaking about Harvey Shapiro a little while ago. I'll never forget, I was coming in, I was playing some Beethoven A major sonata for him, right? We get to the passage... Definitely not a standard fingering, right?
Right.
And so I had the temerity to ask Harvey a question. Usually when I ask him a question, I get blasted, for, I guess, just being too stupid to see the most obvious answer. But, when it comes to that scale, I would say 95% of the people would. And, when you think about it, okay, the scale is kind of awkward because you're having to shift across each string. And it's a legato passage.
Gotcha.
So unless you've got a Lynn Harrell hand where you can unless you've got a hand where you can just reach that far, then you wind up doing things with the bow and the left hand to kind of fake the legato across the strings. And so Harvey said, well, this fingering is much easier. Of course, it's only easier if you're so confident with your thumb in any position or using your thumb with the fourth finger that you're comfortable playing that passage in tune and doing that. And then I guess it is easier because the actual string crossing from... And if you can vibrate your thumb to boot, well, you can get a vibrato and you can get a nice, easy transfer from one finger to another. But yes, it does take a little extra work.
Yeah.
So I guess my scale fingerings are a little unorthodox in that they exercise some of these things.
Interesting, yeah. I'm thinking, I find I use thumb an awful lot more in certain types of passages in quartet playing because... the violins and violas being able to comfortably reach a fourth. There are times where you don't want to be the one person who has an audible shift in that passage where the others played it,
Yeah, isn't that something how they just get all of they can play 2 octaves without shifting in any key. It's really rotten.
Well, and the other thing I like about the hexachord exercise, I mean, when I think about the exercises of different finger patterns in different positions in the Juilliard, but there's no text with them, and they're not always in a logical order, so you can almost kind of have to pick and choose like you would in Sevchik or something and go, okay, let's go from this one to this one to this one that have the principle, and then the teacher adds the prose. But I like your There are a number of them where just a little bit of prose goes a long way to explain the why.
Right. See, in Sevchik's case, what he would do is something similar to what I did, what I tried to do with my book by pointing examples to the repertoire. So he did several, I want to say, practice guides for various concertos, the most famous, being Brahms' concerto and Beethoven and like that. And he showed how his exercises could be used in those cases.
Yeah.
To do it. I mean, it's all well and good to have an exercise like a vibrato exercise like this, right? Where you're doing. Here, I'll show you how this one sounds. Let's see here. I got to get a metronome on for this. Sorry, pardon me for a moment, Benjamin. I'll get my 60 on here. Okay. Got my 60 on here. Funny story. So a lot of my exercises tend to wind up at the metronome marking of 60, and it's kind of a coincidence. I kept on dropping and breaking my metronomes, perhaps on purpose. I don't know, but I always had a watch, and the watch had a second hand that would move exactly at 60. Anyway, that's like telling your kids that you walked to school and it was always freezing all year and it was uphill both ways and the wind was always blowing. Well, anyway, back to my exercise. This is a technical exercise. I'll put it with the metronome. I don't know if you can hear the metronome, but anyway, one can do this on any string. Take an exercise like that, and it's got a certain level of training towards your facility in achieving various speeds of vibrato. But of course, none of this sinks in, including the hexachords exercise, unless it's applied in real life. So if you want to do if you want to practice, using your vibrato in various passages in this way, the vibrato exercise is very useful. So what I did in the book to try and bind together some of the technical information that's in there with actual real life using these things in the passages is I provided a chapter in there on a piece that's typically assigned to high school and middle school students, the Haydn C major, and I just took a page out of that and went after. Let me see. Let me see if I can find. Okay. All right. So here we go. Sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button. Some examples for repertoire-based use. All right. So these are examples from a famous passage in the first movement, which involves some intonation in the upper register, and some places that students typically have difficulty with spacing, right? So there's some explanation, and here you see an exercise that is actually from the book. So I'll play a little bit of this for you. So. And one can do that backwards. Now, what that's all about is finding the spacings of the fingers in thumb position, right? So I have found over the years that I come across many times students are not even sure what the spacing is in a passage as they go from a scale from the D string to the A string, for instance, right? And so they don't know what differences the spaces are as they go from one string to another, and they don't really have an intelligent way of practicing it. So I developed an exercise in my book. Again, this is just raw technical information that would go over all of those spaces. Instead of playing all of the sequences of notes that I just did, the order of them, I'm just going to go up and down just to show the spacings first, okay? So that sounds like this. etc., etc. So one can do those spacings from all half steps to all whole steps from one to another and work on just the spacing, or one can extract from that exercise just the spacing that we needed in the case of the high and do several different orders of notes from that. And then if you have a passage that goes from the D string, let's say it was that particular group of notes, well, you can practice. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So it's a good way of, I want to call it Feuillardizing, and the intonation and spacing in a particular passage with a particular focus. You see what I mean?
Yeah, or Bornoffizing. I mean, because it's the violin world has a lot more materials that are from the standpoint of
they're spoiled. They're
pattern.
very spoiled, the violinists, aren't they? They've got all of that great material. Not that we don't have some, but it's just not as deep and as comprehensive as what they have on the violin.
Yeah, I love referring to a lot of the violin texts. So, I mean, a lot of Simon Fischer's stuff, even though it's not in bass clef. You just have to set it in front of somebody and they see the pattern, they get the idea, and can start transposing it by ear themselves. But it's great because you took those and you adapted them to the needs of the cello.
That exercise, I of course stole from a violinist. Tibor Varga did this as part of his warm-up, and here's how I found it, because when I was a student, we weren't able to just blithely look on the internet and find something. There were these books by Samuel Applebaum called The Way They Play. And sometimes Sammy Applebaum would Xerox a page from violinist X's music, in this case Tibor Varga, he was a famous violinist who I think Alban Berg wrote the concerto for, because it was apparently impossible concerto to play. Tibor Varga had this one page of violin technique that he would practice every day. And in there is this very same exercise, but of course violinists can do half steps and whole steps between every finger. We just don't have that option. And so I adapted it for thumb position because it was particularly useful as a 4-finger exercise.
Yeah, excellent, outstanding. Now,
Anyway, so that's in the book also.
great. Now, you've mentioned Beethoven a couple of times. You have your own Beethoven edition.
I have my own Beethoven edition. I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were going to ask for that, but
I didn't know I was going to either. I'm sorry.
Not only do I have a Beethoven edition, I don't see one. Oh, yes, I do. You're going to just think I'm such a nerd.
No, the recordings.
Things around. Okay, so I did this project at UWM some years ago, and this is actually, maybe I can give you a better look at it. Here's technology. Okay, so let's see if I can get it in the right spot. Yeah, so this is my version of the Beethoven Cello Sonatas, and I made it as a performance edition because I got tired of trying to find some sort of a solution for the C major sonata, the Opus 102, where there's literally no place to turn the page from the beginning of the Adagio introduction to the last movement through the whole last movement. And similarly in the D major sonata, Opus 102 number 2, there is only one place to turn the page in the slow movement, and then after that you've got a fugue where you basically play from the beginning to the end.
Yes.
So I did my own nice version of a cello part for that, and I thought, why shouldn't I share that with my cello students? And the edition itself is matched by a recording that I did. Okay, here we go again. Technology. Incidentally, I'm introducing to you my thumb cam. I use this particular camera when I'm trying to demonstrate for students.
Oh, sure.
To get their thumb up.
Nice.
Etc. So that's that. There. Oh, and here's my other camera where I can talk about spacing and angles of the bow when I need to use them to get down. I need to use an angle to get down there, and also you can see the left hand a little bit better from that side.
Yes.
In any case, you can see I did a deep dive into technology. I had somebody come down here the other day and they said, "Oh my God, it seems like every place I look, there is another device." So anyway, yeah, we did this project and my students all did movements of the Beethoven Sonatas, and we performed all of them, and also the variations. Variations. So this was a bunch of years ago. I'm impressed that you knew anything about that.
I've run across it from time to time. I'm trying to think. I'll let you know if I think of where it is that I come across.
Well, no, I'm glad that you don't know where, because that shows that some of it's just kind of getting out there into the diaspora somehow.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, another question that I always ask all the interviewees, but in some ways has been answered quite a bit. It's about motivation and inspiration, because there's a great deal of motivation and inspiration from listening to a professional cellist's thoughts on whether it's technique or repertoire or their own teaching, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to give you the opportunity, if there's some specific favorites that you have, either in terms of things, if you're having an off day, or just sometimes that we're tired because we didn't sleep well or something, the things that inspire you the most, or when you feel that a particular student could use some sort of a boost.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're getting at. It's funny because my son is now a violinist, and we had to pester him to practice when he was younger because there were all kinds of other things that he was interested in. And at a certain age with young students, it's just establishing the habit of practice. I think that some students respond only to fear of embarrassing themselves in front of their colleagues, perhaps, when they play for them, or fear of playing in front of a teacher who would be displeased with them, or just a teacher, I guess, giving them a bad grade. I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that is the worst possible way of inspiring somebody to practice. But with some people, it seems that there is just no other way. I mean, I've had friends that I grew up with that were very talented and could get away with very little practice, and most people wouldn't know the difference. I would know, because I would have heard them play something that they prepared really well for one day, and then I would hear them play something that wasn't as good. And the students of my father that practiced out of fear of their parents and of my father invariably wound up not practicing when there wasn't some sort of whip behind them. And what I mean by the whip is it can be an audition that you're preparing for. And without the regular practice, the daily practice that I actually kind of enjoy. To me, it's problem solving and it's interesting, and I feel like I'm playing a game of chess with myself, I mean, I know all of my moves, and it's still at the same time I'll once in a while surprise myself, and either find something new or whatever. But those students, they always, it's like their progress, in my opinion, seems to cap at a certain point somewhat lower than what I feel that they could achieve. Of course, it's not my business to say, And I also think that sometimes people that come to the instrument with a lot of natural skills, let's say facility, or a fine ear for intonation, or a fine ear for beautiful tone colors and things like that. Sometimes because those students don't have to work at that thing that other people may have to work at, they kind of let some of the things that they ought to be studying go. As far as the inspiration that I find or my students find, man, if you can't find inspiration from this incredible music, I mean, I have to play Dvorak Cello Concerto in April 9th. I haven't played it in a bunch of years, and I'm down here in my cave studio. My wife got me a sign for the wall. It says the man cave, because I come down here and I do my teaching till all hours of the morning. If I'm working it with somebody in Beijing, I wind up teaching at 2 a.m. or something.
Oh, wow.
I come down here and I start practicing, and the silence that I'm filling with this incredible piece of music by Dvorak, and thinking about the story of his inspiration for the piece, a love lost, and yearning for his native land after he had been in the United States for a time, with all the hustle and bustle of New York City and all of the I guess back in the country kind of feeling of Spillville, Iowa. It's some of it is just so heart-wrenching. It'll leave me in tears. I'll be down here by myself crying, just because it's so beautiful. And I'll tell you when I knew that my son was going to be a great violinist. I came upstairs one day, and he was lying on our bed crying, and had been, I think, for some time. He was really young. I don't even know if he remembers this, but I came and I said, "What's wrong?" And I was all ready to console him. And he said, the Bach Chaconne is so beautiful. And that moment in my life was just really, really special, because it was that moment that I knew this guy's going to be okay. Maybe I forced him to practice. Maybe he sometimes, maybe he didn't like it. I always wanted to try not to chase him away, Yeah. But when it came down to it, that's the thing that came out.
That's great.
There's a Yiddish word for that, nachas. It's pride in some sort of special feeling or achievement that your son or daughter has shown to you.
Nachas. Excellent. All right. So, in addition to the Dvorak, other performances or projects coming up?
Well, I play regularly with the Festival City Symphony. That's really a terrific organization in town here in Milwaukee. I think it's mostly made up of music educators and a few freelance musicians in the area. And so these are kind of my colleagues that are in the trenches in the public schools, teaching orchestras and things like that. And a lot of them are private teachers. It's not the Milwaukee Symphony, but we play in the same hall. And Milwaukee Symphony just recently renovated a space downtown, an old Art Deco theater, and it's really, really beautiful. So I'm looking forward to that. And that group offers, because of the generous patronage of Franklin Essenberg, they offer these concerts free to the public. Anybody that wants to go to a concert on a Festival City concert day can go and hear. For instance, on April 9th, it'll be the Dvorak Cello Concerto, the Enigma Variations. I regularly do recitals here. Jeannie and I did a recital with Beethoven A Major, and I did a Bach D Minor Suite, and what else did we play? Shostakovich Sonata? I can't remember, but that was back in December. Every year I do a recital, and I trot it around to this and that location. I do chamber music in the summers for the past, I think, 20 years or so. I've been going to Vermont at the Green Mountain Chamber Music Festival, but this summer, for the first time, I'm going to stay and give concerts with a quartet, and I'm going to do chamber music coaching in town for just a few students. I want to just focus. I don't want to be involved in a big organization. I would just like to focus on a couple, 3 quartets, and just give them attention every day, coach with them the way we used to rehearse, when my quartet was doing concerts regularly, And I'm going to see if that feels better to me, and if that's just not something that I find that I want to do, then I guess I'll go back and work for the festivals again. It's just I'm getting to the age where I'm kind of starting to experiment with things a little bit and kind of throw something at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah. Outstanding. Well, Dr. Kartman, thanks so much for your time. Always a pleasure talking with you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure, actually, Benjamin. You're a wonderful force in Wisconsin, and I feel like characters like you that have a real honest to God interest in the craft of playing the cello are quite rare. There's a lot of people that go and play and show what they're doing, and then there's some other people that teach because it's a way for them to have an artistic outlet beyond their own selfish urges. And there's just a very few people that do both, and you're certainly one of them. And I want to thank you. It was a real honor for you, honor for me to have been asked to do this with you. And also, I always enjoy spending time with you.
Terrific. It's very mutual. And I'm excited to hear, always am, the thoughts of the students watching, and feedback from viewers is always fun and welcome too. So, and likewise, love to hear when people stumble across some new resources, like your book and your recordings and your website, cellocartman.com. So in the meantime, that will surely fuel them through the weekend and more, and then I'll see everybody else next Friday at 5, and happy practicing between.